There's a particular kind of cold that settles into your bones on a February morning in San Francisco, and I remember every degree of it on the day my entire world flipped upside down. I was standing in a conference room on the 27th floor of Vista Dynamics, the air thick with old coffee and the kind of tension that builds before something bad happens. I'd just delivered the strongest quarterly report of my career, profits climbing 37%, every growth line pointing upward, every word rehearsed until it felt like breathing. Part of me actually believed that this would be the day Nathan Cole finally admitted my team had earned something. I finished my closing line, calling it the best growth quarter in 3 years, and that's exactly when the door burst open. Nathan didn't knock, he never did. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate, and when he walked into that room, the whole atmosphere changed with him. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the numbers I'd just laid out. Just that smug, practiced expression and eyes that felt more like ice than anything human. Every pen in the room went still. He dropped a folder onto the table and spoke like he was reading off a script he'd memorized. "We need to talk right now." I sat up straight and held his stare, already sensing that whatever came next wasn't going to be good. Nathan had a way of walking into rooms like he was about to perform, and this was clearly one of those moments. I offered him a chair. He refused it, choosing instead to lean toward me in a way that managed to feel both threatening and condescending at once. "The board wants to restructure the strategy division," he said. "We need people with vision, not spreadsheet trackers." And then he looked directly at me, and that single glance told everyone in the room exactly who he was talking about. I asked him to be specific. He smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who already thinks they've won before the fight has even started. "No need to make this dramatic, Amelia," he said. "It's decided. You're done, effective now." A few soft gasps rippled around the table. Harper, one of my closest team members, looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. We'd just closed the largest contract of the entire year. None of that mattered to him. In Nathan's world, pushing back only fed his amusement, so I didn't bother. I took a breath, looked him dead in the eye, and asked him plainly if he was firing me. He nodded like I was nothing more than a line item he was crossing off. "You lack vision," he told me. "You manage tasks, not people, and this industry needs real strength." He didn't need to finish that thought. I understood exactly what he meant by strength. In his mind, it meant volume, ego, empty bravado dressed up as leadership. And to him, I was simply the quiet, composed woman who didn't perform loud enough to be seen as someone in charge. I didn't argue. Arguing would have only convinced him he was right. I gathered my files, shut my laptop, stood, and told him thank you for being clear. For a split second, he actually looked thrown off by how calm I was. He recovered fast, telling me to hand in my badge and laptop before 5, then walked out like he'd just finished hunting something down. I sat there a moment longer, aware of every eye in the room. Some people looked sorry for me. Others looked scared, like getting fired might be contagious. I gave a faint smile, packed up, and walked out of that room for what I assumed would be the last time. The door clicked shut behind me, and that small sound felt like the period, at the end of 15 years, with that company. I rode down to the lobby in silence. Outside, San Francisco rain was falling steadily, cold and carrying that familiar hint of salt from the bay. I stood near the glass, watching my own reflection blur between raindrops and passing headlights. There were no tears, no anger, just an unexpected sense of relief washing over me. For the first time in years, I actually felt free. Free from pointless meetings, hollow praise, and constant judgment. As I walked out into the rain, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Just 2 words, "It's time." I stared at the screen, already knowing exactly who'd sent it. Henry Voss, my father's longtime lawyer. The man who once told me I'd eventually understand why my father always said to wait for the right moment. I gripped the phone tighter and looked up at the tower glowing above me. Nathan believed he'd just ended my career. He had no idea he'd actually opened the door to something far bigger. Later that night, sitting in my small apartment with the city lights spilling through the window, I replayed the whole day in my head. Fired, humiliated, and yet somehow I didn't feel any anger at all, just a strange sense of clarity, and one thought that wouldn't leave me alone. This was only the beginning. I smiled to myself and took a slow sip of wine. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you weren't good enough by someone who had no idea what you were actually capable of, let me know in the comments. Where you're watching from right now, maybe on your commute home, maybe curled up somewhere quiet. And if stories about quiet justice and unexpected comebacks are your thing, go ahead and hit follow, because trust me, everything that matters is still ahead. By the time 9 o'clock rolled around, I was driving toward the financial district. The rain had finally let up, but that damp chill still clung to the cobblestone streets. Henry Voss kept his office on the 12th floor of an old building where the hallway lighting always seemed a bit too dim, and the air carried that distinct mix of aging paper and worn leather binders. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years, not since he'd handled the last of my father's legal matters. He opened the door before I even had the chance to knock. "I had a feeling you'd show up tonight," he said in that low, steady voice I remembered so well. I stepped inside, still soaked from the rain, my hair damp against my shoulders. Nothing about his office had changed. Shelves stacked with case files, a pendulum clock ticking away in the corner, and that same old steel safe tucked against the wall. He motioned for me to sit and walked straight toward it. I heard the click of keys, then the heavy groan of metal as the safe unlocked. He pulled out an ivory envelope sealed with red wax, and the second I saw the handwriting across the front, something in my chest tightened. "This is from your father," he said, setting it down in front of me. He left very specific instructions. "This envelope wasn't to be opened until you turned 30, too." I looked at it for a long moment, feeling the room grow heavier around me. "Today's my birthday," I said quietly. Henry nodded. "I know." My hands were shaking as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 things, a letter and a stack of legal paperwork. I unfolded the letter first, and my father's handwriting hit me immediately, sharp, deliberate, unmistakably his. "Amelia, if you're reading this, you've already learned that the working world was never built to be fair. You've spent your whole career proving yourself in a system that was never designed to see you clearly. I've been watching, even from a distance. I know how hard you've worked, harder than anyone around you, and I know that's never been enough on its own. You need something more than effort. You need the power to actually create change instead of just surviving inside someone else's system. By the time you're reading this letter, you will own 90% of Vista Dynamics." I read that line 3 times. Every single word felt like a current running straight through me. 90%. I could barely process it. Henry handed me the second set of papers. Certified transfer documents, fully signed, sealed, and legally binding. I asked him why my father never told me any of this while he was alive. Henry leaned back slowly. "He wanted you to understand the world first," he said, "before you ever held that kind of power in your hands. He wanted you to know what it felt like to be underestimated, so you'd never become one of the people who disappointed him." I sat quietly for a moment, my gaze drifting toward the window. The city glowed outside, thousands of lights reflecting off the glass like watching eyes. My mind went back to that morning, Nathan's arrogance, the way he'd looked down at me like I was disposable. And suddenly it all made sense. My father had seen men like Nathan coming from a mile away. This trust wasn't just an inheritance. It was a shield he'd built for exactly this moment. Henry rested his hand on the desk, "No one knows about this fund except me, Amelia," he said, "not even the board. They all still believe your father sold his shares a decade ago." I looked up, my voice steadier than I expected. "If I reveal this now, they'll turn on me instantly." Henry nodded. "They will," he said, "and Nathan will lead the charge. He controls that board through fear, not respect." I took a long breath, my eyes still fixed on the documents in front of me. My name sat there in plain print, legal and sole owner of Vista Dynamics. A strange mix of pride and unease moved through me. Power had never been something I chased, yet here it was, resting heavily in my hands like a weapon my father had forged years in advance and waited patiently to hand over. "I need time," I told Henry. "Of course," he said, pausing before adding something that stuck with me, "but not too much time. A man like Nathan doesn't slow down just because he thinks he's already won. He'll try to erase every trace of your name from that company, and once that happens, fighting back gets a lot harder." I allowed myself a small smile, then let him feel comfortable for a while. I said, "Sometimes the fastest way to take down someone arrogant is to let them believe nothing can touch them." Henry studied me for a moment, something between pride and worry crossing his face. "You really are Edward's daughter," he said. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my coat. As I stood to leave, Henry asked quietly what I planned to do next. I turned back toward him, my voice calm but certain. "I'll let them think they've already won," I said, "and when the moment's right, I'll show them exactly who's actually running this company." On my way out, I paused in front of the glass door. The reflection staring back barely felt like me anymore. Eyes cold, steady, full of purpose. I understood right then that nothing from that point forward would ever go back to how it used to be. Out on the street, the night wind carried that familiar salt smell off the bay. I pulled out my phone and reread Henry's earlier message. "It's time, this time." I typed back 3 words of my own. "Not yet, Henry." Then I slid the phone into my pocket and looked up at the misty sky above the city. Somewhere in my memory, I could almost hear my father's voice telling me to wait for the right moment. I smiled softly and walked home through the quiet streets, knowing the morning ahead wouldn't look anything like the ones before it. By the time I got back to my apartment in the Mission District, it was nearly midnight. The room sat dark except for the faint city glow through the window. I poured a glass of wine, settled onto the couch, and opened my laptop to log into my old company email. My account had already been locked, exactly as Nathan promised, but I knew other ways around that. 4 years working alongside the engineering team had taught me the system better than most people who'd built it. On an old hard drive, I still had backup copies of Project Day that Nathan had quietly shelved for reasons he never fully explained. I pulled up the original reports and compared them against what was currently listed on the internal site, and the differences jumped out immediately. Numbers had been changed. The previous quarter's revenue had been inflated by nearly 20%. This wasn't some careless mistake. It was calculated manipulation. I sat back, staring at those cold rows of figures, sensing that something much bigger than I'd realized was unfolding, and Nathan was working hard to keep it hidden. The next morning, I got a call from Maya Chen, a young finance employee I'd mentored back when she first started. Her voice was small and shaky. "Amelia," she said, "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but last night I overheard Nathan talking to the CFO. They're planning to sell the company." I froze. "Sell Vista?" "Yes," she said, "to a corporation called Vera. They're aiming to close the deal within a few weeks, but something feels off. The numbers they're showing potential buyers don't line up with what's actually real." I could hear the nervousness in her breathing. I asked quietly if she could get her hands on documents that proved it. She hesitated for a long moment before answering that she'd try, but that if anyone found out, she'd lose her job. I told her to be careful, not to let anyone suspect a thing, and that she'd already done the right thing just by telling me. After she hung up, I sat there for a long while, Henry's warning echoing in my head. A man like Nathan doesn't stop just because he thinks he's already won. Now I understood exactly how right he'd been. That afternoon, the news broke across every financial outlet. Vista Dynamics was being acquired by Vera in a deal worth close to $1 billion. The press painted Nathan as a visionary force reshaping Silicon Valley. I stared at his photo on my screen, tailored suit, triumphant grin, and thought about the engineers he'd laid off in the name of cost efficiency. None of the coverage mentioned them. None of it credited the people whose ideas had actually built the company in the first place. That evening I met Henry at a small cafe near the Embarcadero. He glanced at the headline on his phone, then looked up at me. "He's racing toward the finish line," he said, "but a deal like this can't close without shareholder approval. You know exactly what that means for you." I nodded. "I know," I said, "but if I reveal my position now, they'll assume I'm just trying to sabotage the merger. I need proof first. I need to actually demonstrate the fraud." Henry set his cup down. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" I told him I still had a few people inside the company I trusted completely, and that I'd start there. 3 days later, I reached out to Harper Lynn, the former HR director and one of my closest friends from Vista. Nathan had once pressured her into signing off on paperwork that buried employee complaints. When I told her I needed to meet, she went quiet for a long time before finally agreeing. We met at a small diner on the south side of the city, and she kept glancing around the room before speaking. "He's cleaning house," she said. "Files are disappearing fast." I asked if she still had any copies saved anywhere. She nodded slowly. "I have a drive," she said, "but if I hand it over, there's no going back for me." I looked at her steadily. "Then don't do it for me," I said. "Do it for my father, for the company he actually built, for the people Nathan treats like they're disposable." Harper held my gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. That night, an email landed in my inbox with no subject line, just a single attachment. When I opened it, hundreds of internal reports filled my screen: hidden expenses, off, book consulting funds, executive bonuses buried in the numbers. Nathan's signature appeared on several of them. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight with a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was furious. Another part felt genuinely sad. Nathan used to have real vision. When he first joined Vista 7 years earlier, I believed he could take the company somewhere great. But power had reshaped him into someone cold and calculating, someone willing to sacrifice anything to come out on top. I forwarded the files to Henry with a short note, got the first piece. He replied within minutes, "You'll need more. Find someone who can independently confirm it." My mind immediately went to Liam Torres, the lead data engineer Nathan had pushed out for supposedly not fitting the culture. I still had his number saved. When I called, he answered after just 2 rings, his voice tired but composed. "I had a feeling you'd call eventually," he said. I asked if he still had the old analytics backups, explaining I needed to cross-check them against the current reports. He was quiet for a beat before answering that he did, and that he had a few other things I'd probably want to see as well. We arranged to meet the following day. After hanging up, I stood by the window watching the traffic crawl below, my chest heavy, but my resolve steady. I didn't know exactly what I was stepping into, but I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed silent, everything my father had built would disappear into the hands of a man who treated deception as a strategy. The wind off the bay swept in cold and salted, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the city's steady hum wash over me. My father's voice surfaced in my mind again, telling me that sometimes protecting what's right means being willing to become the storm yourself. I opened my eyes, caught my reflection in the glass, and whispered under my breath that Nathan didn't know me yet. Not really. I met Liam the next day at a small cafe tucked down a quiet alley, the same kind of place we used to spend hours in years earlier, tossing around ideas Nathan always brushed aside. He hadn't changed much, same worn coat, same set jaw, same restless eyes that never quite stopped scanning for trouble. When I sat down across from him, he simply nodded. No need for me to explain why I'd called. He'd already figured it out. I kept a full copy of the entire data system before I left the company. He told me plainly, his voice low and even. I knew something was wrong even back then. They altered the numbers, and not just for the investor reports. They were hiding actual transfers. I glanced around before asking quietly if he could prove it. He pulled a small hard drive from his bag and slid it across the table. "It's all here," he said, "but I can't get back into the internal system to verify anything further. I've been locked out for a long time now. You'll need someone still on the inside." My first thought went to Harper. My second thought, far less comfortable, went to Noah Green, the internal auditor, young, eager, always angling for approval from whoever held the most power in the room. I'd never fully trusted him, but right then, he was our only real option. That night I contacted Harper first. She agreed to help, though her tone stayed cautious the whole time. "Nathan is watching everything," she warned me. "You have no idea. He even had internal tracking software installed." I told her I knew, and that we needed someone who understood the audit system inside and out. Noah, 3 days later, we all gathered at Harper's apartment, blinds drawn, the room smelling faintly of takeout containers and stale coffee from too many late nights. 3 laptops sat open across the cluttered table. Liam sat across from me, Harper worked her way into HR records, and Noah showed up late, visibly on edge. "Do you really want to do this?" he asked as soon as he walked in. I looked at him steadily. "I don't want to," I said, "but if we don't, everything my father built gets sold off to Vera, and a lot of good people here lose their jobs." He hesitated before finally sitting down. "I'll help," he said, "but only if there's real evidence behind this. I don't want to get dragged into something personal." I told him that was fine. I didn't need blind loyalty from anyone, just accuracy. Over the following 2 weeks, we worked quietly and carefully. Harper pulled HR reports, Liam cross-checked server logs, and Noah dug through audit files. Each of us stuck to a separate thread so that if one piece got exposed, the rest of the operation stayed protected. Things moved more smoothly than I expected, until one evening at Harper's apartment, Liam stumbled onto a strange file buried in the financial data, labeled simply Consulting Fund X9. He opened it, and the whole room went silent. Dozens of approved transfers carried Nathan's signature, all routed to shell companies that didn't actually exist. The total ran into the tens of millions. "He's bleeding the company dry," Harper said, her face draining of color. "And using that money to dress up the books for the sale," I added. We immediately backed up everything and encrypted every file we had. But the next day, something shifted with Noah. He avoided eye contact, kept his phone off more often than not, and answered Harper's questions in short, clipped responses. I understood immediately Nathan had probably gotten to him. That night I texted Noah privately, asking to meet. He replied that he was busy. I pushed once more, saying I needed 10 minutes to verify some audit data. He went completely silent after that. A cold unease started settling in. Harper noticed the shift before I even fully processed it myself. "I'm not sure we can trust him anymore," she said. "Yesterday I saw him talking to the CFO. Maybe it's nothing, but I don't believe in coincidences these days." I sighed, agreeing that we couldn't afford to cut him loose too abruptly either, since acting suddenly might tip Nathan off that something was wrong. The next 3 days were rough on all of us. Sleep became scarce. We stuck to encrypted channels and kept communication minimal. Liam grew increasingly tense, and Harper started feeling like she was being watched. I found myself rereading old, clipped emails from Nathan. Messages that once felt routine now read like quiet threats. Then Harper sent one short message that stopped me cold. "He knows." I asked who she meant. "Nathan," she replied. I just watched him leave the meeting room with Noah, and he was smiling. I understood exactly what that meant. Even if Noah hadn't openly turned on us yet, Nathan had clearly picked up on the danger circling him. I knew he'd act soon, and we needed to be ready for whatever came next. That night I called Henry and told him everything. He listened quietly, then said something I've never forgotten. "Amelia, real power doesn't live in what you actually hold," he said. "It lives in how well you convince others you don't have it yet. Let him grow confident. Arrogant people always open the door for their opponents eventually." I sat alone for a long time after that call ended. Outside my window, the city felt unusually still. A single distant ambulance siren, the only sound cutting through the quiet. Worry and resolve braided together inside me. The storm was building, and soon it would strike right at the center of Vista dynamics. Before I finally fell asleep, Harper sent one more message. "I uploaded the first file to a secure cloud," she wrote, "but there's one thing you should know. Someone on our team isn't with us anymore." I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking, because I already knew exactly who she meant. And I understood that if Nathan truly knew what we were doing, this fight wouldn't leave room for a single mistake. I closed my laptop and told myself firmly that if Nathan wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time I wouldn't be the one absorbing the hits. The story broke publicly just 2 days later, splashed across every major tech outlet on a Monday morning. "Former Vista Dynamics strategy director under investigation for internal data tampering," one headline read. A photo of me, cropped from a conference the previous year, sat right beside Nathan's polished press photo, my serious expression next to his confident smile, under a caption about the Vista CEO addressing acts of sabotage. I read the article alone in my dark apartment, the only light coming from my laptop screen. Every sentence felt like a carefully sharpened blade, never accusing me outright, but heavily implying I was behind whatever system breach had shut the company down overnight. Buried in the piece was a quote from Nathan himself. "We regret that some individuals cannot accept change," he said, "but at Vista, professional integrity will always come first." I let out a quiet laugh. He'd moved faster than I expected. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Harper, her voice trembling. "They're investigating the system breach," she said. "They found a strange login using the same IP as your old office." I told her I hadn't done that. "I know," she said, "but what about Noah?" I didn't answer right away. That was exactly the question I'd been dreading. Noah, the man who'd avoided me all week and then vanished from every shared channel entirely. In that moment, I understood Nathan wasn't just suspicious anymore. He knew, and he was using Noah as his weapon. By that afternoon, Henry called, his tone unusually grave. "Amelia," he said, "I just got word they filed a formal complaint with the Securities Commission accusing you of unauthorized data access." "So he's trying to turn me into a criminal," I said. "Exactly," Henry replied, "and if you react now, you'll walk straight into his trap. Let him feel secure a little longer." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long while. I wasn't scared of losing my reputation. I was scared for the people who trusted me, worried they'd get pulled into this fight alongside me. Harper texted soon after. "They called me into HR asking questions about you. I told them I knew nothing, but I don't think they believed me." I replied simply, thanking her and telling her not to do anything else for now. That night I walked out to the old pier, the place I always went whenever I needed to clear my head. The water stretched out black and restless, the wind cutting cold, the air thick with salt. I opened my phone and read a message from Liam. "The data is locked," he wrote. "Someone wiped every backup copy off the servers. Nearly everything we'd worked to gather was gone. But Henry's words came back to me again, that power requires patience above everything else. I took a long breath and told myself that if Nathan believed he'd already won, I'd let him keep believing it. The more confident he became, the more exposed he'd eventually be. The next morning, Nathan appeared on live television, dressed in a gray suit, his voice smooth, his smile perfectly rehearsed. The recent incident was caused by a few former employees interfering with our systems, he said, but we have everything fully under control. Vista is moving forward. I watched the entire broadcast, my hand tightening around my coffee cup. He lied without a single crack showing. But I caught one small detail behind him, the Vera logo displayed on the studio screen, the very company set to acquire Vista. He wasn't defending himself at all. He was selling something that was never fully his to sell. I sent the clip straight to Henry. He replied almost instantly. Good, he wrote. We need more proof that he's misleading investors. Once we have that, we can block the deal entirely. I met Harper and Liam again at her apartment. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. Liam was visibly furious. Noah betrayed us, he said. I checked the access logs myself. He uploaded the encrypted files straight into Nathan's system. Harper slammed her hand down on the table. I trusted him, she said bitterly. I didn't blame either of them. In this kind of fight, loyalty turns out to be the rarest currency there is. We stop, I told them. What, Liam nearly shouted, after everything he's done. Not forever, I said calmly, just for now. Let him think we've backed down. Once things settle, we strike from a direction he never sees coming. Harper studied me for a long moment, understanding slowly spreading across her face. What exactly are you planning, Amelia? I turned toward the window, already thinking ahead to the shareholders' meeting. For the following week, I disappeared entirely. No emails, no calls, no social media presence at all. The press speculated wildly, running headlines about Amelia Cross going silent after sabotage allegations. I ignored every bit of it. I needed the quiet. A storm is always most dangerous in the moment it pauses. I spent those days quietly reorganizing everything, every date line, every proof document, every transaction bearing Nathan's signature. Each file went into 2 separate accounts, neither one traceable back to me. I sent the first batch to Henry, and he called me the moment he finished reading it. This is it, he said, exactly what we need. Are you ready? I told him I'd always been ready. It simply hadn't been the right time yet. A week passed. The Vera deal dominated every headline. Nathan showed up at events, praised endlessly as the golden figure of Silicon Valley. And me, I stayed quiet, watching from the shadows, waiting for the exact moment he'd start feeling untouchable, because that would be the moment he'd lose everything. On Friday night, I sent Henry one final message. It's time. He replied within seconds. Understood. I'll arrange the shareholders' meeting for Tuesday. I stared at my screen, calm as ever. Nathan believed he'd destroyed me completely, but all he'd actually done was build the exact stage I was about to walk onto. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, closing my eyes. My father's face appeared in my mind, warm and steady as ever. Now you understand why I told you to wait for the right moment, don't you, Amelia? I nodded quietly in the dark and whispered that yes, it was finally time for me to come back. Tuesday morning arrived cold and damp, mist mixing with the smell of coffee drifting up from the street below. I woke earlier than usual, showered in cold water, and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd walked out of that building a year earlier. Her eyes looked steady now, stripped of fear, focused entirely on what came next. I put on a black suit, tied my hair back neatly, fastened my father's old watch onto my wrist, and walked out the door. The Vista Dynamics Tower rose ahead of me, tall and unyielding against the gray San Francisco sky. It had been a full year since I'd last set foot inside, and this time I was walking back in not as the employee they'd fired, but as the person who actually owned the place. Henry had arranged everything in advance. The special shareholders meeting was scheduled for 10 that morning. Nathan believed it was simply a closed session to finalize the Vera sale. He had no idea that on paper, the person holding 90% of the voting shares was me. I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist looked up, startled, then forced an uneasy smile. "Miss Cross," she said. "It's all right," I told her calmly. "I have a meeting with the board." She nodded quickly and said nothing else. I stepped into the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb. My heart beat slow but completely steady. When the doors opened, Henry was already waiting in the hallway, dressed in a gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. "They've started," he said quietly. I nodded. Good. Let them finish talking first. Through the glass doors came Nathan's voice, confident and controlled, the same tone he'd once used to dismiss me entirely. "Vera is submitting its final offer," he was saying. "If we agree today, the acquisition closes within 2 weeks." A round of polite applause followed, chairs scraping against the floor. Henry gave me a subtle nod. I took a breath and opened the door. The room went completely silent. Every head turned toward me. Nathan stood at the head of the table, his expression flashing from shock to that same practiced smile within seconds. "Amelia," he said evenly, "I think you've walked into the wrong room. This meeting is for board members only." I walked straight to the table and set Henry's leather folder down on the polished wood surface. "Good," I said, "because I am the board." The room froze completely. Henry opened his case and pulled out a stack of certified documents, sliding them across toward Nathan. "These are the verified papers, confirming MS. Cross's legal ownership," he announced. "According to the trust established by the late Chairman Edward Cross, 90% of Vista Dynamics now belongs to her." One board member leaned forward, flipping through the pages, his voice cracking slightly. "Is this actually real?" Henry nodded firmly, "All verified, notarized, and updated on the shareholder registry as of this morning." Nathan stood frozen for several long seconds. I watched confusion flicker across his face before it hardened into fury. Then he laughed, a short, hollow sound. "This is a joke," he said. "Another one of your little schemes." "No," I said calmly. "It's the truth you never bothered to learn." I opened the second folder and spread the pages across the table. "And this," I continued, "is the independent audit report on your financial operations. Phantom transactions, fake consulting funds, unrecorded payments." The room shifted immediately, heads bending forward, low murmurs spreading as fingers traced over familiar company names attached to impossible numbers. Nathan's voice wavered for the first time. "Where did you even get this? Did you hack my system?" I met his eyes directly. "I didn't need to hack anything," I said. "I had access." A thick silence settled over the room, and I let it sit there for a moment before continuing, slow and deliberate. "You fired me because you thought I was useless," I said. "But you forgot this company carries my father's name. And I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to clean up the mess you made." Henry handed another document to the board secretary. "By the authority of the majority shareholder," he announced, "MS. Cross requests an immediate vote for the removal of Mr. Nathan Cole from the position of Chief Executive Officer." Nathan turned sharply toward him. "You can't do that," he snapped. "It requires at least 2/3 board approval." "Not when she holds 90%, Henry interrupted, his tone unshaken. "That's the majority." The truth landed on Nathan like a physical blow. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists. He looked at me, his voice trembling now. "You planned this from the very beginning." I shook my head. "No," I said, "you planned it for me. I just waited for the right moment to use it." From the far end of the table, Dalton, one of my father's oldest allies on the board, spoke up in his low, steady voice. By company statute, he said, the motion takes effect immediately once confirmed by the majority shareholder. He looked directly at me. Would you like to sign MS Cross? I took the pen and signed with a clean, deliberate stroke. Nathan stared down at the paper, his expression a mix of disbelief and something close to hatred. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Was this revenge? I looked at him, calm and completely unshaken. No, I said, this is justice. Henry motioned toward the security guards standing near the door. No one said another word. Nathan stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, quiet and final. I exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in the room begin to dissolve. Sunlight poured through the tall glass panels, spilling warmly across the table. Dalton looked over at me and nodded once. Welcome back, Amelia Cross. I smiled a real smile, the first genuine one in months, not out of victory, but out of finally belonging somewhere again. I gathered the scattered papers and spoke clearly, my voice steady. I didn't come here to take anyone's place, I said. I came to restore what Vista once stood for, trust, people, and honesty. Starting today, we begin again. The room stayed quiet for a beat, then filled with soft, agreeing murmurs. I knew this wasn't the end of the fight, not by a long shot, but that morning I'd reclaimed something that mattered far more than power. I'd reclaimed my voice. As I left the room, Henry walked beside me. Your father would be proud, Amelia, he said softly. I looked at him and smiled. I hope so, I said, but there's still so much work ahead. I don't just want this company to survive. I want it to live the way he always dreamed it could. Henry nodded. Then let's get started, he said. After Nathan was escorted out, I stood there for a long moment in complete silence, the ticking of the wall clock the only sound in the room. There was no applause, no congratulations, just the heavy quiet of people who'd witnessed something too sudden and too enormous to fully process yet. My heart beat slow and heavy, no thrill of triumph in it, just something deeper, a genuine sense of relief. Henry stood beside me, still holding the signed documents. We should stay and finalize the paperwork, he said. I nodded. A moment later, Dalton, the longest, serving board member and someone who'd worked alongside my father for years, cleared his throat. By regulation, he said, the board requires a temporary executive. I propose a mess. Cross take the position until a formal decision is finalized. No one objected. A few people exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. Henry placed the appointment document in front of me, and I signed it. As my pen touched that final line, I understood that from that moment forward, I was officially leading Vista Dynamics, the company my father had built, and the one Nathan had just been forced to leave behind once everyone else had filed out. I stayed behind with Henry. We should announce this soon, he said, before rumors start spreading on their own. I told him to announce it, but quietly. I want them to see actual results before they hear the full story, I said. Henry smiled faintly. Just like your father, he said. I stepped into the hallway, and through the glass panels I spotted Nathan standing in the main lobby, surrounded by reporters, camera flashes going off in rapid bursts. I stopped to watch. He spoke in that same calm, confident tone I'd heard countless times in press conferences before. The company is in a transition period, he was saying. There's been some misunderstanding. I remain the legal CEO until the court rules otherwise. This is a deliberate attempt to seize control. A reporter asked if he had any proof to back that up. He smiled lightly, glancing toward where I stood. I'll present it soon, he said. The truth always comes out eventually. Watching him, I realized Nathan had never actually learned how to lose gracefully. He was doing exactly what he'd always done best, controlling the narrative. The power was gone, but he still had the media, and he clearly still knew how to use it. Back in the boardroom, Henry was sorting through documents. "He's stirring things up again, isn't he?" he asked. "He is," I said. "He's chosen the public route." Henry's voice hardened slightly. "We can counter that," he said. "The press still listens to people who tell the truth." "Not yet," I said, shaking my head. I don't need to argue with him. I'll let action and numbers speak for themselves instead. By late afternoon, every legal step had been completed. Nathan was officially removed as CEO, and the filings had already been submitted to the stock exchange. Still, I knew he wasn't finished. I returned to my old office, which looked almost exactly the same except for the missing name plate. I picked it up, wiped away a thin layer of dust, and set it back down on the desk. Afternoon sunlight poured through the window, casting a pale golden glow across the room. I remembered my father sitting right there years earlier, his voice echoing in my memory. "Power isn't meant to prove who's stronger," he used to say. "It's meant to prove who's right." When I opened my laptop, my inbox was overflowing, some messages offering congratulations, others clearly just trying to reconnect, and plenty more simply curious. One name caught my eye immediately: Nathan Cole. I opened the message. It contained a single line: "You think you've won. Let's see who keeps the trust longer." I stared at those words for a moment, then smiled faintly. He still didn't understand. I'd never cared about winning at all. All I ever wanted was to keep this company true to what my father had built it to be. The next morning, the media exploded with coverage of the leadership transition. Some headlines praised the rightful heir's return, while others suggested I'd only succeeded because of the Cross family name. I read through all of it without much reaction. Words couldn't shake me anymore. Henry called, his tone firm. "Let them talk," he said. "The truth will quiet them soon enough." I held my first internal meeting with the department heads that day. Some watched me cautiously, others with obvious curiosity, but none with open defiance. I laid out my plan: a full audit, an end to the culture of fear that had taken root, and a genuine effort to restore trust among employees. When I finished speaking, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then Harper, ever my steadfast ally, spoke up. "She's right," she said. "It's time we start over." One by one, the others nodded along. Looking around that room, I saw something shift in their eyes. The doubt hadn't disappeared entirely, but for the first time in a long while, there was a genuine flicker of hope. That evening, I stood alone in front of the tall office window, looking out over the city. The light stretched across the horizon like a glowing river. In my own reflection, I saw a face that looked calm, resolute. I whispered quietly to myself that Nathan could control the media all he wanted, but I'd let the truth control everything else. I switched off the lights and left the office as the clock struck 11. The wind outside felt strong, but not cold at all. For the first time in months, I genuinely felt light. Nathan still had his schemes to fall back on, but I had Henry, Harper, Liam, and most importantly, I had something no one could ever take away from me: my father's trust. The battle in the boardroom had ended, but the fight for Vista's soul was only just beginning. And this time, I wasn't the one being pushed out. I was the one leading its rebirth. A week after Nathan's dismissal, the atmosphere inside the company still felt tense. Rumors traveled faster than any official memo ever could. People whispered in the hallways, gossiped over coffee in the lobby, and whenever I walked by, conversations would suddenly drop into silence. Their eyes followed me everywhere, curious, wary, uncertain what to make of me yet. I didn't blame them for that reaction. To most of them, I was simply the founder's daughter, the woman who'd appeared out of nowhere, toppled the CEO, and claimed the top seat for herself. I understood clearly that trust couldn't just be inherited along with the shares. It had to be rebuilt carefully, one piece at a time, and I knew that work needed to start immediately. On my first morning as official CEO, I walked back into the same boardroom where I'd been fired just a week earlier. Inside, the department heads sat in tense silence, the atmosphere thick enough that I could hear individual pens tapping nervously against paper. I stood at the head of the table, set my folder down, and spoke slowly. "I'm not here to talk about the past," I said. "We all know what happened. I'm here to talk about what comes next. Starting today, we begin again, not as victims of old mistakes, but as people given a genuine second chance to do things properly." No one spoke right away, but a few expressions started to soften around the room. I opened my folder and introduced what I called the Human First Initiative, a plan built around one simple idea: putting people back at the center of every decision the company made. I talked about restructuring HR, introducing transparent evaluations, and rehiring talented employees who'd been pushed out simply for disagreeing with the old leadership. Harper was the first to speak up. "If you can actually follow through on everything you just said, Amelia," she told me, "I believe this company can still be saved." Liam nodded in agreement. "And I'm ready to head back to the engineering floor," he added, "if you want me to help rebuild the old product team." I looked at both of them and smiled softly. "I don't just want you to," I said. "I need you." We worked for hours that day, and when the meeting finally ended, a few people lingered behind to ask questions. Someone remarked quietly that they'd never sat through a meeting where the CEO actually listened this much. I answered simply that I didn't need obedience from anyone. I needed honesty. The days that followed blurred together into an endless string of conversations. I visited every floor of the building, sat down with employees individually, and asked what they needed, what had worn them down over the years, and what had once made them genuinely love their work. Some were surprised by the questions, others seemed hesitant, and a few clearly didn't believe I actually wanted to listen. But slowly, little by little, they began opening up. I heard stories about unfair promotions, ideas that had been ignored for years, and people who'd eventually left because they'd started feeling invisible. I wrote every single story down. Each one felt like another piece of the puzzle Nathan had shattered. When night fell, I stayed alone in my office, the whiteboard in front of me covered in messy, overlapping notes: restructure, fairness, transparency, creativity. I knew I was heading in the right direction, but I also understood it wouldn't be easy. I'd reclaimed the company itself, but winning back the trust of the people inside it would require proving myself through action, not words. Then came the first real challenge. One of Vista's major investors, Axton Capital, requested an emergency meeting. They doubted my capability and wanted proof that I actually deserved the position, not just the cross name attached to it. The meeting took place in a glass-walled room on the top floor. The Axton representative, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Tanaka, looked at me coldly. "MS Cross," he said, "we respect your father's legacy, but investors care about returns. What proof do you have that under your leadership, Vista will actually grow instead of just coasting on its past?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and displayed the prototype Liam's team and I had been quietly developing: a transparent, ethics-driven AI platform built specifically to restore accountability. "We're not chasing what's fastest," I told him. "We're building what's most trustworthy, and trust, Mr. Tanaka, is the longest-lasting form of profit there is." The room went completely silent. Tanaka studied me for a long moment before finally nodding slightly. "We'll see," he said. "You have 6 months." After that meeting, I threw myself completely into the work. I stayed at the office until midnight most nights, running tests alongside the engineers, reviewing code line by line, adjusting every small detail that needed refining. We wanted to build the first AI system capable of explaining and taking genuine responsibility for its own decisions, something Nathan had once dismissed entirely as a waste of time. 3 months later, we finished it. We called it Lucid, an ethics-centered AI system. On launch day, the press packed the atrium. There were no elaborate displays, no flashy slogans, just me standing in front of the cameras, saying quietly that we don't build artificial intelligence to replace people. We build it to help people make better choices. The speech spread quickly. The same outlets that had once doubted me shifted their tone almost overnight, calling Lucid a genuine milestone for human-centered technology. Vista's reputation began climbing again. The stock price rose, and more importantly, the company's spirit slowly started breathing again. One evening, walking past the engineering wing, I noticed something written across a whiteboard in blue marker. "She didn't come back for power," it read. "She came back for us." Beneath that line were dozens of signatures. I stood there for a long moment, feeling real warmth spread through my chest. When I got back to my office, Harper was waiting by the door, smiling. "See, Amelia," she said, "they believe now." I smiled back and told her they didn't believe in me exactly. They believed Vista could actually be better. She nodded, and in that moment I realized that was probably the real victory all along. Not the CEO title, not the shares, but bringing back the faith of people who'd once felt completely forgotten. Outside the glass, the sunset stretched across the skyline. I stood still, watching it slip beneath the horizon, calm and steady. And for the first time, I truly understood what my father had meant when he told me that power isn't what you hold. It's what you use to lift others up. I knew this was only the beginning. A year after officially taking over Vista Dynamics, the company had transformed so completely that even I could hardly believe it was the same place. The cold, fearful silence that once haunted its hallways was gone entirely. The glass walls that used to reflect tense, anxious faces now caught laughter and the hum of late-night collaboration instead. Every morning as I walked through the lobby, employees greeted me with easy, genuine smiles. No more of the cautious glances that used to follow the old CEO around. The faces that once looked down whenever leadership walked by now met mine directly, confident and unafraid. I could see it clearly, that light back in their eyes, the light of people who actually believed in something again. I kept every promise I'd made to them. Every department had been rebuilt around genuine human value, fair reward systems, and open collaboration across teams. And the human first initiative had officially turned those ideals into reality. Our first quarterly report under the new structure didn't just hold steady, it grew by 18%, a number that genuinely surprised everyone, myself included. That afternoon, Harper and I sat reviewing the data together when she grinned and said if Nathan saw these numbers, he'd lose his mind completely. I laughed and told her he was probably far away by now. Her tone softened slightly. "Do you ever think you'll forgive him?" she asked. I stayed quiet for a moment. Forgive. That word still carried real weight. Finally, I said that I didn't need to forgive him. I just needed to make sure he could never hurt anyone else again. That was enough for me. A week later, an invitation arrived for the National Technology Leadership Conference, an event honoring top executives from across the country. Vista had been nominated for Most Human-Centered Innovation. I hesitated before accepting, not out of fear, but because I knew exactly who else would be there. Nathan. The conference was held in Los Angeles, and when I stepped onto the stage to present our AI platform, Lucid, I spotted him sitting quietly in the middle row, composed, unreadable. He wasn't the commanding CEO surrounded by an entourage anymore, just a man who'd once had everything and lost it. When my presentation ended, the audience rose to their feet in applause. I bowed slightly, then noticed Nathan approaching. His eyes no longer carried that old arrogance, just a weary sort of calm. "You did what I never thought was possible," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "Congratulations, Amelia." I smiled gently, no bitterness in it, no sense of triumph either. No one builds an empire on power alone, Nathan, I told him. It has to be built on trust. He nodded once, a faint sadness crossing his face, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling no anger at all. Maybe somewhere inside him, some piece of the man he used to be still remained. But it no longer concerned me. I'd moved well past that chapter of my life. When I returned to San Francisco, I went straight to the office, where Harper, Liam, and the technical team were waiting in the conference room. The latest quarterly results already pulled up on the screen. Revenue growth of 34%, employee satisfaction at a record 91, and new investors lining up to partner with us. Liam smiled and said, "We did it, Amelia." I looked around that room, the same one that had once symbolized control and fear, now pulsing instead with energy and laughter. "Not me," I said. "Us. This is what Vista was always meant to be." The room stayed quiet for a moment, and then someone started clapping, the applause slowly spreading, warm and completely genuine. After the meeting, I stayed behind alone. An old photo sat on the desk, my father and me on the day Vista opened its very first branch. He wore a gray suit, and I stood beside him as a little girl with a ponytail, smiling brightly. I placed my hand gently on the frame and whispered that I'd kept what he built, but this time it wasn't just for me. That evening, I walked the corridors slowly. Lights still glowed in plenty of offices, laughter and spirited discussion drifting out from the engineering wing. People were staying late, not out of fear of their boss anymore, but because they genuinely loved their work. I slowed my steps, feeling the warmth of a place that had once broken me completely. Before leaving, I stopped at the front entrance and looked up at the glowing Vista logo on the glass wall. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a legacy, my father's, the team's, and even the failures that had shaped me along the way. They once thought I'd been fired because I wasn't good enough, I murmured to myself. But that's exactly what led me to find my real purpose. Outside, the bay wind blew hard, carrying that familiar chill of salt and fog. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, a calm smile settling on my face. I knew this journey was far from over, but I wasn't the defeated one anymore. I was the one leading the way forward, and in that moment, I finally understood what my father had meant all along. Power was never about the seat you hold. It's about how you use it to light the way for others. That was the true victory, and it was also the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one where Vista was no longer the empire of a single man, but the home of hundreds of people carrying forward the dream my father had left behind.